White fear has driven this country since its founding. Think about Thomas Jefferson's notes of the state of Virginia. I'm going to come home. I'm trying to get there. Right? Think about, he said, I tremble for this country because of the sin of slavery. Right? He was afraid of what that meant, the divine punishment that would come for holding another human being in slavery. And he writes that particular formulation in the section on habit formation. Because he said, what happens to a child who witnesses the violence of slavery? What does it mean in our country that we can hold the ideals of democracy, and when those ideals are extended to black and brown people, we are willing to erode the social safety net? What does it mean that I have to tell my child, right, the story of how to interact with police because I want him to come home? What does it mean that here I am, I've done everything right, I'm at the height of my profession, I'm the president of the American Academy of Religion. The day I got the call for that I won, my baby calls me from Brown to tell me that he's sitting on a bench doing an assignment and a police officer drives up, blocks his way out, comes out and says, who are you and why are you here? He says, I'm a Brown student just doing an assignment. The police officer hits him in the face with the flashlight, looks at his feet, looks at the bushes, and tells him the park closes at 9:30. And my son says, yes, sir, but it's only 6:30.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. In case you're new here, my name is Maren.
And I'm Maureen.
Right, so in today's episode, we are going to be reacting to a video, a speech of an African-American professor. And he was giving a speech in a university, and this was 8 years ago. But quite frankly, I don't think that a lot has changed since then.
Right, and you know the most important thing that he said that really caught my attention was that America has experienced trauma, specifically Black America has experienced trauma, and more often than not, it is quite difficult for them to articulate the trauma they've gone through.
Yeah.
But in his own opinion, he says, in order for America to start facing the impact of slavery, Black Americans need to be articulate. They shouldn't shy from being articulate and look the enemy in the eye and tell them exactly what they did to them.
Yeah, but the question is, how then do you achieve this purpose if every time Black Americans have to conform, there's this thing we were told called the code switching, right?
Yeah.
So how again are you going to be articulate, and how are you going to express yourself if you're not even allowed to speak, to be who you are in a certain room because you're considered a threat, right?
So he also talks of Black Americans being perceived as threats by white America, and therefore Black Americans have to use a tone that proves to white America that they have nothing to fear about them.
Which is quite sad. But guys, let's not talk too much. Let's just dive into the video and then we come back and talk about it. Consider subscribing if it's your first time here. Also, let us know what you think about this video in the comment section. Let's watch.
I can't begin to tell you how often I have to leave the particularity of my experience at the door in order to make white people comfortable. It's almost as if, as James Baldwin writes in Notes of a Native Son, we have to make ourselves blank in order to wash away your guilt. And so we dance this dance, America's racial theater. It's this dance so that you can't be called a racist and I can't trigger your fears. Huh? The worst thing that you can be called is a racist, even though everything that's coming out of your mouth, Donald Trump suggests otherwise. Right? We find ourselves in this dance, unwilling to confront the ugliness of who we are. Just think about this. The last piece of great legislation passed in the Great Society was the 1968 Fair Housing Act. I'm watching my time. 12 years later, Ronald Reagan is elected. 12 years later, there is the triumph of a political ideology designed to undo the Great Society and the New Deal. Did we fix the country in 12 years? 1965, the Voting Rights Act, right? By 1980, wholesale attack. We don't need to protect them anymore, right? Shelby, we don't need to do it. And what happens after the Shelby decision recently, right? We get a proliferation of attacks on voter registration, voter IDs, right? Think about it. At every turn, at every moment of progress in this country, we have seen a reassertion of the value gap. At the moment in which we give voice to the principles of liberty and equality, right, in the context of the American Revolution, what do we get in response? We reconcile those principles with racial slavery. John Adams, it is said to King George, "We will not be your Negroes." At the very moment in which he's giving voice to an idea of freedom is predicated upon an intimate understanding of unfreedom, a reassertion of the value gap. In the moment of radical reconstruction, we offer, right, a vision of multiracial democracy. What do we get in response to radical reconstruction? We get convict leasing, right? Convict leasing. You wouldn't have the city of Birmingham without the labor, the forced labor of convicts, quote unquote. People arrested for what reason? Right? Slavery by another name, as Brother Blackman talked. And you get Jim Crow and a reassertion of the value gap. In the context, right, of the black freedom struggle of the mid-20th century, everyday ordinary people demanding dignity and standing. What do we get in response? We get the tax revolt in Northern California. And we get calls for law and order. Value gap. What do we get when we elect our first black president and we think we turned the corner? We get the vitriol of the Tea Party. And we get a wholesale attack, right, on the voting rights of black and brown peoples. At every turn, at every moment of progress, that progress is arrested by a reassertion of the value gap. We have to do the work, but we're afraid. We are afraid. White fear has driven this country since its founding. Think about Thomas Jefferson's notes of the state of Virginia. I'm going to come home. I'm trying to get there. Right? Think about, he said, "I tremble for this country because of the sin of slavery." Right? He was afraid of what that meant, the divine punishment that would come for holding another human being in slavery. And he writes that particular formulation in the section on habit formation. Because he said, what happens to a child who witnesses the violence of slavery? Something is broken on the inside of such a child who experiences that. Something happens to their character, Jefferson suggests. But in that moment of fear, right, it drives policy. Think about, right, the fear of Abraham Lincoln in the second inaugural, supposedly the second founding. Think about the fear surrounding Black Rage with the Black Panther Party. You know, that cover of the New Yorker where they had Obama dressed as a Muslim and Michelle Obama as Angela Davis. And they were bumping fists and people were like, what does that mean? Did they bumped fists? Did the black people just begin revolution? Fear drives policy. The moral panics around the so-called super predators, where the data suggested was not true. What did the moral panics do? It drove mass incarceration. Think about what happened with the Central Park Five. Those babies were innocent. Their lives stolen. Think about all the millions of folk who are locked up because of fear. Fear driving policy. We can no longer be afraid. And that fear actually drives our political behavior, black political behavior. As I said earlier, we're afraid to trigger your fears. So we will grit our teeth in the moment which you say something a little off color. Our fear of triggering white fear affects our behavior. So we're masking day in and day out, walking past each other, not really seeing the humanity of the person right in front of us. No wonder we're stuck. But Malcolm X said this, and I'm going to say this in front of you guys and make you mad. I don't care. We have to stop sweet talking. Tell you how we really feel. Tell you what kind of hell we've been catching, and let you know if you don't clean up your house, if you're not ready to clean up your house, you shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down. Now, I'm not trying to burn down anybody's house, but what Malcolm is talking about is frank speech, that we have to confront each other honestly. One of the most exhausting things I have to do is to convince my fellow white citizens of what is happening. Every time we have to engage in this haunting public ritual of grieving in public, we got to convince you that it happened. What does it mean that Diamond Reynolds' 4-year-old baby had to muster the resources to comfort her mother in that moment? I'm here, Mama. I'm here with you. What does it mean that Alton Sterling's 15-year-old baby is crying, weeping, because he lost his father, wouldn't see him again? What does it mean that if it wasn't for the footage around Walter Scott, that police officer would still be walking the streets? What does it mean that I have to tell my child, right, the story of how to interact with the police because I want him to come home? What does it mean that here I am, I've done everything right, I'm at the height of my profession, I'm the president of the American Academy of Religion. The day I got the call for that I won, my baby calls me from Brown to tell me that he's sitting on a bench doing an assignment and a police officer drives up, blocks his way out, comes out and says, "Who are you and why are you here?" He says, "I'm a Brown student just doing an assignment." The police officer hits him in the face with the flashlight, looks at his feet, looks at the bushes, and tells him the park closes at 9:30. And my son says, "Yes, sir, but it's only 6:30. And then his partner walks around the police cruiser and says to him, and both of them lean in with their hands on their weapon and say to him, "The park closes at 9:30. And my son puts up his hands and says, "We don't want any trouble." I could have lost my only child that day. And I got to convince you of what that means. We're not going to fundamentally change unless we look ourselves squarely in the face. You learn race in Minneapolis by just simply driving around this community. It's in the very built environment. You don't have to be a bad person. It's how we are habituated as citizens of this country, a country that has been drenched, right, in the reality of white supremacy. We have to address it. We have to address it if we're going to get beyond it. So what I call for is a revolution of value. We need to change our view of government by changing our demand of government. We need to change our view of black people by changing our view of white people, and only white people can do that. And we need to change what ultimately matters to us. If we have a society predicated upon greed and narcissism and selfishness, we will continue to produce the likes of Donald Trump. But it's in our hands. I refuse to dance the dance any longer. For my grandchildren who are not here, I refuse to try to make you feel comfortable. Because I know of a man who was crucified on Calvary, who refused to become adjusted to injustice. What does it mean to bear witness to the virtues of generosity and humility and justice in this moment? It will require something monumental of us, something profound. Value gap, racial habits, fear requires of us a commitment to democracy. In this sense, we have to become the people that democracy requires of us. That means we have to reject the idea that this is God's gift to the world, that is, America is the shining city on the hill. That rigs the argument. No, we need to look ourselves squarely in the face, in great pain and terror, and do the work of actually achieving our country. I pray that we do so, because if we don't, we will certainly see the fire.
So guys, welcome back. Let us know what you think about that episode on the comment section. You know, I feel like it makes a lot of sense when Dr. Eddie was talking about how in America a lot of things are driven by fear, and he mentioned about policy-driven fears, you know, and this is what you find that has ended up becoming such a big problem to the extent where Black people are being incarcerated, even those ones who are like falling victims due to these policies, you know. Another thing I feel like it's important that he mentioned was, let's talk about the part where he was talking about kids who witnessed cruelty against their own people during slavery and, you know, days proceeding from that. Let's talk about the child who witnessed cruelty being done to his people. Something gets broken inside, you know, and I feel like it made quite a lot of sense, and it explains a lot of things. Like, for example, when they talk about when palm-colored people fear the situation turning around, the reason why they keep on upholding white supremacy is because
the reason why they keep preventing Black excellence.
Exactly.
And whenever Black excellence emerges, they crumble their systems down in order for them to remain under the white rule.
Right, because there's that fear of, what if the melanated people in America
not forgotten or forgiven us?
Of course, nobody can forget such a thing. Even them, they like to pretend like they have forgotten. They like to ask melanated people to forget what happened to them, but nobody has forgotten. So they have that fear of, what if one day they come to be in control
Positions
and then
of power.
Exactly, they do exactly what we did to them,
and
you
are
know,
still doing.
Yeah.
Because can you imagine if like Black America right now controls all the jobs, controls all the hospitals, controls all the financial sectors, and now white people, when you're going to look for employment, white people have to check their race there, you're white. Hence, Black people are given priority when it comes to jobs. White people follow behind Black people in everything, even in health sectors. When a white person and a Black person enters a hospital, Black people will be given more priority. Just the same way the system in America is right now in regards to white people.
Right.
Can you imagine white people in America living as second-class citizens to Black Americans?
And there's this thing I heard, guys, where on TikTok you find a lot of experiences, people talking about what they've been through, right? And there's a guy, Black brother, who was talking, right? And he was saying he wanted to sell his house, and now when he called the real estate, the people who normally evaluate the value of your home before they can sell it, they used to give him such a low figure that he also felt it was too low to sell his house for, you know. So he decided to talk to his white friend and told the white friend to go and step in for him and pretend to be the owner of the house, and then he took out all his photos and the family's photo, so that house, it wasn't in any way linked to him, so that he could hear the evaluation the white friend would be given. So they got another company to do it, and believe it or not, the white friend was given a figure 5 times higher than what the guy was given. So he ended up suing the first company he used to evaluate.
Quite sad.
That's quite sad. And then you try and ask yourself, these are the kind of things, to be quite honest, I don't feel like the palm-colored people in America will have to go through or will have to experience in order to understand. They're just things that you yourself, if you don't go through it, you really won't understand what that person is saying. But in the Black community, this is a form of victimization, you know. This is a form of victimization, because what does that tell you? It goes to show that they feel like
They're
people
deliberately
devaluing. They're deliberately devaluing people from the Black community, and this is just one incident to give us an example of how they try and put Black people down. Because you ask yourself, when the palm-colored friend went, what had changed? Only his color.
Only his color. And then, you know, when Dr. Glaude says that America will never start to heal, and this was 8 years ago, we are still waiting, we are still singing the same song 8 years past, you know, when he said America will never start healing unless these tough conversations start being held in rooms, you know. And that's why I usually say sometimes when you play episodes of the white people, palm-colored people who come out to speak against what their own kind do against Black people, that's why sometimes we usually comment those types of palm-colored people because they're bringing conversations to their people, you know. Yeah,
And they normally face consequences.
Normally face consequences, but they still bring these conversations to their people. And he says that black people are very stuck in America. They're very stuck. They can't take a step forward because they're afraid of bringing these kinds of conversation because they'll be perceived as a threat. So most of the time what they usually do, they just switch codes or talk in a less intimidating way, especially around workplaces, in order for them to not be perceived as threats by their co-workers.
And guys, it's quite sad that he's just an example. He's not the only person. Literally, the whole of Black America lives like this, where you were born and they started drilling in you how to survive in the world when you're still a young kid. Meaning, they tell you how to handle the police, how to handle a white teacher in a classroom. They tell you just basic survival skills, and that still does not guarantee you that palm-colored person won't try to unalive you. You grow up, you give birth to kids, and it's the same thing. You are practicing it, and you're also passing it down to your kids. And I'm asking myself, in what world is it okay or fair to live like this,
Yeah, and now that you mentioned that, it reminded me of another incident. After we played the incident of the black kid who was being followed in his own neighborhood by the white people, I also saw another black kid who was saying when they first moved to a white neighborhood, he used to live with his aunt in that white neighborhood, right? And then his aunt, the first day he went to live with her, she had to give him a drill of how to handle the white neighbors, how to code switch so that he wouldn't look like a threat, how to be less intimidating, to be, in other words.
I'd like to ask the question, exactly what in black people intimidates palm-colored people? I'd like to know that. As other than the obvious, exactly what is it that is intimidating to palm-colored people,
Because you have to be quite a small person for you to keep putting other people down in order for you to feel comfortable, for you to keep necessitating other people to play small in order for you to be comfortable around them. You have to be a very small person to do that to people,
Another thing Dr. Cloud has mentioned is that Black America needs to change their view of white people, right? And only white people can change that, right? And I feel like this, for as long as white people, it really solely lies on the white color population for them to change how people view them. Because already, right now, like somebody said this was the year where a lot is going to be coming out to the public, a lot is going to be coming to light. And even here in Africa, there are people who are starting to see the truth, not as much as we would like it, but there is a good number of people who are seeing reality.
And to be quite fair, in America, the palm-colored population was the one who committed most atrocity towards black people, and it's only fair for them to change. Let's look at this scenario, right? There are two students in a class, and the bullies another student. It's upon the bully to change himself and reform in order for the system to go back to being peaceful and them coexisting in the same classroom. So it literally is quite up to white people to change themselves, change their supremacist tendencies, and change their systemic racism.
But as we usually say, I don't feel like
it's gonna happen anytime soon, because they're still benefiting from how the situation is.
And I normally find it funny when you see a palm-colored person coming out to say that stop accusing us of having white privilege and benefiting from white supremacy system.
None of them is investigating to see why they are being accused of such things.
The fact that a small percentage of the palm-colored population does not benefit from this, maybe because unfortunately, I was hearing somewhere an African lady who went abroad, right? And she was saying, for her, it's quite surprising to see a palm-colored person who's poor because the system has always been favoring them, right?
Because they were given a head start in life
and their ancestors plundered. So for her, she was surprised. She
didn't understand why there were poor white people.
Right. And then, so why am I mentioning that? As I was saying, if you find a palm-colored person who's claiming to not benefit from white privilege or white supremacy, or who's trying to pretend like it doesn't exist, it's because for some reason they're not, and it's a very small population of them, you know, they're not benefiting from such structures. And you ask yourself, you know, anyway, you see where I'm going with that, right? So a big percentage of the palm-colored people, their population, they do benefit from the white supremacy system, and white privilege does exist, you know. So it's upon them to change and make America better for everybody. But for as long as they benefit from, you know, from putting other people down, then that is what they are going to do for a long time, you know.
So guys, let us know what you think about this episode. Also consider subscribing if you've not yet subscribed to our channel, and we'll see you on our next episode.